Welcome in, everybody. It is time to kick off the second season of Cannabiz Conversations. I am your grateful host, Sean Welsh. I am excited to kick this season off. You guys may or may not know the legend sitting to my computer right. I don't know how it ends up on your phone, but to my right is an unbelievable guest. But before we launch into guests this season, we have to give the proper thank you to our sponsors. Today's episode, you can see it in the upper right corner. That is the King Solomon Nutrients, designed to simplify your growing process. Rooted in over 2 decades of horticultural experience and backed by science, this product delivers all the essential nutrients your plants need to thrive throughout the growing phase. From hydro to soil, you can expect uncompromised results, quality, and optimized care. Low cost, easy 2-part system will lead to the best harvest you've ever had, regardless of what you grow. And I ask everyone, are you down with the King? Check out King Solomon next chance you get. So getting into today's episode, it is the lead off. I had to pick the right guest to lead off a new season. Like I said, we're up to date. We got sponsors. We got new lights. We're really coming into our own. So we kick it off with Joe Hodas. Joe, how are you, man?
I'm good, thanks. I like that intro was great for that nutrient company. That's awesome. You're good at that.
You know what? King Solomon, run by Damian Solomon, unbelievable brand, unbelievable man of horticultural experience. He was on season 1, and we are grateful for his opportunity. So thanks for giving us the feedback there. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. Joe, you are the president of the Wana Brands. You've been through the industry. We like to start the show off like this. What is Joe's cannabis origin story? Tell it to us as it happened.
You bet. So, you know, I'm a slow burn, to put it in joint terms. I had always been a cannabis consumer from pretty much from the age of 18 on, you know, typical college type experiences, and had found an affinity for the plant, you know, back then. But it wasn't an everyday part of my life. It wasn't something that I felt particularly passionately about. If someone had weed, I would smoke it, but you know, it wasn't like something that I was seeking out on a regular basis. And that, you know, carried on through my early adulthood. And then I became I was a partner with an ad agency here in Colorado. This was around 2010, and a company had come to us looking for some brand support. And I went to my partners and I said, "Hey, what do you think about this? As a cannabis company, they say they make a pot soda. I think it sounds like it'd be a fun opportunity for us to work in a new industry." My partners were like, "Yeah, that sounds okay. We'll try it. We'll check it out." And that company was a company called Dixie Elixirs at the time. And Dixie asked us to do some research to understand, you know, who's consuming products, why they were consuming. And so we did what are called intercepts, you know, which are essentially standing in front of a dispensary and asking people why they're going in and what they're buying, and really begin to understand why they use cannabis. And I saw that research come back, and I was fascinated by who in 2010 in the medical cannabis market was using cannabis and why and how. It was a much more diverse audience than I was really anticipating. And so I really began to tune into what was going on. And of course, we did some great brand work for Dixie, and I became really friendly with the ownership group of that company. And in 2012, Colorado passed Amendment 64, which legalized cannabis in Colorado. So I began to get a little more serious about where this industry potentially was going. And I continued that relationship with Dixie, even though at the time my partners at the agency said, "You know what, we've got a couple of really big conservative clients that pay our bills. Like, now that this is getting more visible, we're not super comfortable with continuing to work with the cannabis company." And so I said, "Well, that's unfortunate because I'm really interested in it." And so
yeah, we kind of gone the opposite way there, guys. You're not excited. Yeah. I'm more passionate than ever. So thanks a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, that was really telling, actually, now in hindsight, to understand what some of the issues were that I was going to face moving forward. And I decided that, you know, really I needed to make that jump into cannabis. And I've been, again, keeping a relationship with the Dixie guys. So I became their first chief marketing officer in January of 2014 at Dixie. So the first week of adult use legalization, which for anybody who was around Colorado at the time and or in this industry on the legalized side at the time, it was bananas. Like, you know, just the first market in the history to legalize cannabis in this way.
It was insane. we were living in Colorado in 2003 to like 2010. And a bunch of my friends I'm from the Midwest, right? Chicagoland area. And we were all sort of moving west. And I remember just hanging out at one of the dealerships I was working at. And someone had said something about a medical card. And I said, what did you say? And he said, you don't have your cannabis medical card? I'm like, wait, what? And a guy jokingly, he's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, well, I get migraines. He's like, boom, you get a card. Go see the guy in Denver. Here's his card. I'm like, oh, okay. And the industry sort of exploded, quickly on the medical side, where dispensaries became a deal. DEA was making huge publicity stunts out of, terrorizing grows in Denver. And this was 05, 06, 07. People were just, and it'd been on the books, what, Joe, 2000, right? I think was medical use in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
So
it had
been lingering, and guys in their 20s were like, wait, we can go do what? And so then it exploded. When you talk about the Wild West, I'm just reminded of those times, just how crazy it was to be at a dispensary, because in that time, we launched our first company, which was called Green Biz Done Better, and we were helping dispensaries get websites. We were helping them get online. 2006, 2007, man, what I would have done if I would have stuck with that business by now. Actually, I don't know. So I probably would have burned myself out. I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing. I think it's easy in hindsight. But so when you talk about the Wild West of straight legalization in 2014, what was the first thing that really stood out to you about the opportunity in front of you working at a beverage, business partner at the time?
Well, so there was a lot of excitement, right? And that it's easy to get caught up in all the PR. Excuse me. So many media platforms are coming to us and wanting to do interviews and talking about cannabis, and it was just this big media circus, and that feeds the ego, right? You see yourself out in major publications and on TV shows, and they did a whole series called Pot Barons on CNBC that featured Dixie, and it's really easy to get into that and be absorbed by it. Unfortunately, at the same time, you got to keep your eye on the business, because the business is not easy. This is a very complicated, very challenging industry. I mean, your point, you just said that, just said kind of jokingly, like, if I stuck with it, but that's probably pretty hard. Yeah, it's hard, man. It is not easy. And so there was all this excitement, but by the same token, we weren't probably doing all the right things from a business perspective to make sure that we were going to be long-term viable. Now, Dixie's still around, by the way, so that's not a disparagement of them as a company. But what's interesting is that at the time, I got to know Nancy Whiteman, who founded Wana, and up until the last few weeks here has been the CEO and the North Star for Wana. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I was watching Wana, and little did I know that Nancy was watching Dixie, and we were really the top two companies at that point in Colorado competing with one another. The difference was that at Dixie, and you can see this in the numbers in hindsight now, but we were both kind of doing this, right, from a growth perspective, and then we weren't properly handling our cash flow, and we ran out of oil, so we were off shelves. We started to go like this. Wana kept going like this, and they chose to really focus on a format which was gummies. Turns out that's what people really liked. So gummies currently comprise 70 to 80% of the edibles market, and back then it was significant, probably not that much, but drinks and beverages were 1-2% of the market. So we were not only not choosing the right formats, but also having some challenges with keeping our business running with oil, meaning the extract from the plant that fuels the products that we were making. So we began to lose market share, want to continue to grow in their market share, and that really kind of set the trajectory for both companies long term. So to your question, in this kind of Wild West, in this frenzy, it was how nimble can we be? How much can we grab onto the publicity and the PR and the excitement? What products are really going to shake out? What is the consumer really looking for? What's that consumer experience? The one right thing that I think we did, and this goes back to the marketing side, is that we had packaging at Dixie that was head and shoulders above everything else out in the market, because we said, you know what? I used to call it the contract with the consumer. When the consumer is walking into a dispensary, having never been into a dispensary, and they're seeing all of these products on the shelves and all of this like new stuff that they can have access to that they never even knew existed. How would I communicate to the consumer that we're the product and the brand that they want? Packaging. That's the first thing they can see on the shelf. They can't touch or feel the products. They can't smell them or sample anything from an edibles perspective. So if I can look at a shelf and I can be the professionally packaged, really well done product, that gave me a much greater chance of reaching that consumer from a consciousness perspective. And I think it was the right move. We spent money, we spent time, we really focused on our packaging and the look and feel of the brand. And that really was a big differentiator for us back then.
I think from my perspective, again, I'm a consumer first. I take a lot of crap from people that I don't live the cannabis life. Like I'm in the automotive world. It's not that much different. It's all crazy in its own way. I've been in the background of cannabis for almost 20 years. And, we do some funding. We help some people out along the way, whatever. But one of the major things that I come across as a consumer is packaging. Because you said it, right? I go in a grocery store. I'm going to taste a cherry, Joe. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even just going to look at the package or look for mold. I'm going to taste that bad boy. I'm going to get into it. You can't do anything like that. And so from that perspective, right, the only thing that you can attract me to is my eyes, is that sense of visibility right into it. So impressive thought process there. I circled a word that I want most people to hear again. It's the word nimble. I just read an article that Nancy had done, an interview with her recently where it was like, kind of business lessons. She was dropping it. That was one of her main lessons, if I remember reading it correctly, was being nimble, not overcommitting, not over persuading, not getting too hyped about anything, just being able to stay nimble. At the core of who you are today, Joe, is that a big part of your, just you being you in business and the way that you look at the perspective of it from lessons learned along the way?
Oh, 100%. I'm about 6 foot, 230, but I dance like a ballerina because I have to. It's, even now that we're I'm losing track here, 10 years into it, you still have to be nimble. And you got to be nimble on a state by state basis, by the way. It's not even nimble, nationally as a brand. I mean, there's that part too, but in every single state, you have to be nimble. This SKU isn't working. That packaging scheme is not the scheme that the state has decided they're going to allow because they don't like these colors. There's so many parts and pieces that really impact you on a day-to-day basis that you have to be nimble. And so at the sort of executive level, when I'm making decisions on behalf of the company, I have to be cognizant of what's happening at that really local level and how that then ladders up to the overall business strategy and what that means for us from an impact perspective. Where do I push? Where do I pull? Where do I make changes? Where do I stay the course? What's gray area versus what's clearly black and white? All of those are parts and pieces of my daily existence right now.
So when do you make the jump to the Wana Brands, Joe? What does that look like to you from the beverage world to here? And tell me a little bit, because I love these discussions at the highest level. I assume it happened with Nancy. It's not like you were talking to a recruiter, for goodness sakes. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Talk to me about what that navigation, that thought process kind of for you looked like making that jump.
Yeah. So I spent 4 years at Dixie as their CMO, and it was great. Huge learning opportunity. I got involved in regulatory stuff. I was at the Capitol all the time, which is really where I began to develop my relationship with Nancy. We'd see each other at the Capitol. We'd have conversations. And then from there, we'd, grab lunch. We'd pick each other's brains, that kind of thing. And as I saw her growing Wana and really understood just how wicked smart she was, I began to really grow a deep respect for her. So things with Dixie, for me at least, ran their course in 2018. And then I subsequently went to a couple of other companies, all within the cannabis realm. One was an umbrella company with a few operating companies underneath it, but publicly traded. So I got that experience of being with a publicly traded cannabis company. And then I went to a true startup called a company called Go Fire, where we were making a meter dose inhaler. So in other words, a vaporizer that was able to track and understand what you were consuming, how much you could dose it with a click wheel. We had some IP around that, but we required a tremendous amount of funding for our runway. And this was also just around the time of what we call VapeGate, when there was a big issue with vaping and that crisis occurred. Funding in the cannabis industry had dried up. And then guess what happened? Little thing called COVID at the very beginning of 2020. And I was actually first made aware of COVID because we were supposed to be heading to China to visit with our manufacturer for the product out there that was making a bunch of the parts and pieces. And we kept getting told, like, we need to push it back a little bit. There's something going on over here that is a health thing. And, they're canceling flights. And this was in December of 2019. And, it turns out, of course, that was the beginning of COVID as it moved over to the United States. And so that's when we had to make some changes at Go Fire. And I really had to take stock and evaluate. That was a time where I said, okay, am I going to continue forward with cannabis? I love cannabis. I love what I'm doing. And by the way, I forgot to mention this back to my earlier comment about the kind of cannabis consumer I was. early on, I began to understand that there was a journey with the plant that that I wasn't taking previously, that I have since, to understand what it means to me, how I consume it, what the benefits are, and really begin to understand what is special about this plant, versus being the guy that just had that smoked up when people were around with weed. Very different journey. But my appreciation for the plant had changed over time, and so I said, am I going to continue doing this or not? I began to quickly explore some different opportunities that were outside of cannabis, realized I was far too damaged to do anything but cannabis. And so Nancy and I had been talking, and when I said, look, I see what's going on with COVID, like I'm getting a little bit freaked out because I'm kind of in between things right now. She's like, come work for me. I'd like to have you as our CMO. As she will tell you, she said publicly, like, she really was not one to just like bring people in and not do a full interview with their old exec team and everything, but we'd known each other for so long. She trusted me. She said, okay, Joe's starting as our CMO next week. And that was that. And I've been home ever since, and very much appreciative and thankful and grateful for where I am and the opportunity that Nancy provided.
The perfect story of it's not what you know, it's who you know. At the end of the day, right? Our connections is what moves us forward in this world. And I think that's a perfect example of that. When you get involved with that, obviously you said COVID, right? Kind of just put us all in a different place, kind of set us, you hit a crossroad and you were just trying to decide if this was for you. You made the comment offhand that you're too damaged to go elsewhere. I make the same joke about automotive, that if I went to go do something else, I'd probably just curl up and dry up into nothing. Right. Because I only know the pain I know,
right.
But I wouldn't have it any other way, as I'm sure you wouldn't either. As you said, we're 10 years net of you and the state of Colorado being the first adult use state. I just throughout the tapings of this season, we're going to be talking about regulatory things and kind of how everyone feels cannabis is overregulated in that sense. Joe, how much do you, in your position now, have to really deal with the regulatory side of things, or is that a part of the team? How does that break down within an industry company your size?
I'm going to tell you what that means here at Wana, but I'll also tell you that I think we're a little anomalous in this. So I'm still very much involved in the regulatory side. We don't have a technical government relations function. We don't have a regulatory function. A lot of that comes through me, our VP of Innovation, a guy named Mike Hennessy. He picks up a lot of that as well. So we get involved. We are lending our voice. We participate in things like here in Colorado, something called Colorado Leads. Historically, we've been involved with USCC at the federal level. And on a state-by-state basis, it's a fairly constant thing. I just had a call yesterday about Pennsylvania and some of the politicians there and what they're doing. And so it's a constant that I'm involved with, but I enjoy being involved with it. So I probably put myself into that position because it's something that is of interest. And I also know that, having those relationships and helping to shape regulation and policy is really where it's at, because even the slightest change that maybe on paper doesn't seem like a big deal can really have a net positive or negative impact on us as a business. So it's incumbent upon me to pay very close attention and to also be involved.
I totally agree. Joe, if you don't know a young woman by the name of Kim Stuck.
I know Kim.
I figured you might. She is also on this season of the show, and she's just a regulatory boss. You know what I mean? The compliance, the amount of knowledge that goes on there. And I guess, if you've been around that long, I mean, if I remember talking to her, she had said that she was like the first government regulatory employee there was when it came to cannabis. And I just sort of like spun around. I said, what did you say? And she said, yeah, it's legit, like the first one to work for a government agency looking at cannabis. So we've come a long way, still more to come, obviously. So you're taking over as a CMO of a gummy business, Joe, as it, peripherally looks. What was the first thing, second thing? Like, how did you approach this job from a CMO position, taking over, as you said, a brand that was still, on its way? What do you do when you step into the new role?
So a lot of what I did initially was, and this is something that I would apply to any company I was starting with, is I work with a nonprofit called the Global Livingston Institute, and I'm telling you that because they have a tagline which is "Listen, Think, Act," which I love because I think it applies to so many different things, right? And so it applies to anytime I start in a new position. Listen, think, act. That's what I did. I listened for a little while. I thought about what I was seeing, what the brand was missing, what it wasn't. One of the things that that Nancy actually tasked me with, so I can't say this is me that came up with it, but she said we need to really understand the DNA of our brand. We know we have a brand people love. We know that there is a brand there, but what is it? How do I articulate that? What are the components of this brand? So that was a little bit of an assignment initially when I started, was to kind of help figure out like how to pull apart the pieces of the brand so we can then put it back together and say, okay, this is the brand. This is why we are who we are, and the ways in which we exist in the world. So that was one of my first projects, which then kind of lent itself to looking at what are we doing with in-store? How are we communicating with employees? What does our packaging look like? Does it support the brand archetype that we believe is who Wana is, our heart and soul? And then I also began looking at the team structure, which is, people are a critical part of any business, obviously the most critical, I would argue. And so looking at the team structure and saying, do we have the right people in the right places to get us to where we need to go? Because what we were doing is adding states rapidly, right? We were growing and expanding. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but when I started, maybe we were in 8 states. We're now in 20. So, every new state means entirely new marketing materials, new packaging. Do we have all the right thought leaders in place to do what we need to do from a tactical perspective? So it was right size the team. It was look at the brand and making sure that what we were communicating visually supported what we knew to be the DNA of our brand internally, and then defining what is that DNA and how do we get better at articulating that and replicating that market by market.
So, Joe, you bring me to my question, which is, how does one figure out one's DNA as a company? And I ask that sort of selfishly because I get asked all the time what that is to me on the automotive side from the company that I run, that I've been doing for over a decade. People are like, what's your mission statement? What's your DNA? Look, I'm just here to help people stop wasting money. Like, that's what I do. And the people are always like, no, there's more to it than that. So how does one figure out a company's DNA, Joe?
So it's a great question. And I wouldn't say it's a science. I'd say it's more of an art, and it has different components to it. In this particular case, I did a couple of things. One is I brought in an outside expert. I brought in a branding expert, woman I worked with at my agency who is more on the planning, analytical side, and she runs different exercises that help us, I guess I would say, take examples from other companies and other places and other industries to create what are called brand archetypes that helped us to identify, like, if this is the brand archetype, yeah, that's who we are. This is what feels right as a way to describe Wana in ways that maybe we couldn't necessarily articulate for ourselves. So then when we have this archetype, we can say, okay, are the things we're doing laddering up to that archetype? Are we, in this case, we were the hero archetype, and the hero archetype, this gets real deep into nerdy brand stuff, but the hero archetype for us isn't like hero and Superman with a cape. It's more a hero in the sense that we're able to help and support people in ways that really have an impact on their lives. That's how we want to show up as a brand. So then once you begin to define what are the elements of that archetype, then you can apply it and say, okay, does this logo really kind of help to articulate what we're saying is the brand archetype? And you begin to apply that lens to everything that you do internally and externally. And that's kind of how you define it. And then you got to check in on it every 6 months and say, are we hitting this? And then the next phase was we reviewed our mission, vision, and values. And what is that? How does that line up with what we said is our archetype? And are we living to the mission, vision, values that we had previously? We made a lot of changes to that, and we did it over and over and over again until we got to a point where we said, okay, this feels right. This feels like who we are. So it's a very iterative process, and it takes a long time. It's not easy.
But much like, again, like you talk about going through, this evolves, though. That's why you say check in on it, right? Because it happens. It changes, especially in this situation where tomorrow you could have another legal state that requires you to do something completely different than another. And this you've kind of dropped this twice, and I want to come back to it. This idea that states have different packaging that you're allowed to have or that is shown, is that a real ongoing issue with new states? Is you can't have certain packaging in New Jersey that you could have in, say Illinois?
Sean, you would not believe. I mean, I'll give you the most extreme examples. In Florida, our packaging in Florida is black and white, and our gummies are translucent. No color in the gummies. Packaging is black and white. When we talk, you said earlier, we talked a little bit about regulation and kind of there are parts of regulation that I wholeheartedly believe in, like testing, like child resistance, like age gating dispensaries, all of that kind of stuff. I 100% believe in.
Yeah.
But when you have people that don't understand cannabis or fearful of cannabis that are then tasked with regulating cannabis come in and say, well, we don't want anything that's going to be, we don't want any colors that are going to attract kids. What?
How does the kid get in the dispensary? What are we even talking about? Like, it's politicians getting involved in things politicians have no business truly being involved in. That's why I tell people all the time, they should all just call Kim and just have someone who respects the plant, who understands the plant, to be a part of your planning discussion. But Joe, to a bigger point, why is everyone trying to reinvent the freaking wheel here? Okay, there are states, Colorado, I would say to another extent, Michigan. They have some very good, good guidelines, good things to follow. Why do you think people feel it needs to, reinvent it? Is it because it's state by state, and this is why we put ourselves in this predicament?
I think it's because, well, yes. I mean, of course, if there was federal guidance on this, that would make a big difference. But that aside, it's 100% ego. It's every regulator in every state saying, well, we're going to do it different and we're going to do it better. And, we think that the packaging should be black and white because we want to tell our constituents that we're taking care of kids and making sure that they're not being put at risk. 100% ego. I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with, because it's not like I've seen some state come out with some reg where I'm like, oh man, why didn't we think of that?
No one else had thought of that before. Yeah, except for the black and white packaging with the translucent gummy. Like, again, we get in our way to try and figure out and avoid and I'm not a parent, okay? So I am like even worse on this discussion. But I remember in Colorado during medical use, where we wanted to open a dispensary. We'd gotten some cash together. We wanted to open a dispensary in town. So we had to have a public, hearing. Okay. Right. And a woman shows up with a gigantic map of where we wanted to put it. She blew it up where we wanted to put it. And she's like, so you want to be here? She's like, grade school here, middle school here. I'm like, okay, cool. I totally get that. I said, do you mind if I come up on your map real fast? She said, why? I said, well, I just want to point out all the liquor stores real fast because you hadn't missed those. And I'm just confused why you did that, because your kid can actually walk in a liquor store. He couldn't set foot in my dispensary. I got 2 security guards. He won't have an ID. So let's talk about the liquor stores. Well, we don't want to talk about that. But why? I don't understand. Is it because, well, your plant's going to ruin our community? Okay, now we're getting into it, right? It's not about protecting your kids. It's about protecting an image you think exists. And I said, so how about this? We're going to give this much to taxes for your kid's school. Would you take that? She stopped dead in her tracks, Joe. Wait, this money could affect our kids' school and make it better for them? It sure could. Well, okay. So we all have our reasons why we change, but I don't like using a convenient narrative. I don't like saying something because it fits today's discussion. And I think cannabis gets shoehorned into that all the frickin' time.
Oh, absolutely. And Sean, we're still dealing with it today. Like every day we're dealing with that because there are, prohibitionists who want to roll back legalization, and they're going to find everything they can to do that. And, so every year we spend dollars to fight against it, and we have to, to fight public opinion. And of course, it's easy for them to put out data without any sort of, foundation to understanding that the data is not valid or real. And all of these things, we still deal with on a daily basis.
It's just narrative data, right? What is it? What do I need to do to scare you? What can I show you as a part of the data set that puts you in an uncomfortable position about how people drive high, or how 18-year-olds now use Delta 9 instead of alcohol? Like, just please give me a break. I joke it's all the alcohol guys up on Capitol Hill, right? Because they see the line graph. They see cannabis passing alcohol. Joe, I live in a prohibition state, all right? State of Wisconsin. It doesn't get any more ridiculous when it comes to cannabis than here. Most recently, the bill they wanted to pass to legalize medical cannabis was 5 state-run dispensaries that could only sell gummies and edibles. That was the plan. That was the whole way forward, and it's just a bunch of BS. It's a whole thing. That's why we have Melissa Agard, one of our top representatives here in the state, on last season. She was our closer because I wanted her on here to talk about why it should be legal, why she's fighting for it, and she doesn't even partake. She doesn't. She always says the most dangerous thing about illegal cannabis in Wisconsin is the fact that it's illegal. and that we aren't doing what we can to help our communities. So yeah, it's hard to be in prohibition states, Joe. It really is. It makes it difficult to see a way forward, especially when I lived in Colorado and I was able to experience the openness of it. When you talk about spending money on Capitol Hill to fight public opinion, is that again state by state, Joe? Is that a part of the approach that you have to have?
Yeah, it is. And then we don't get deeply into it in every state. Colorado is our biggest market, our home market, and so we do get involved here. Not it's not the case in every state, but yeah, I mean it is a state by state thing, and there's I will say that at least as it relates to some of the tactics, usually we'll see it maybe in Colorado first, and then we'll know that they're going to try that in Florida. We kind of have the intel to know that there are a couple of key groups that fund a lot of this, and that they approach it in different markets the same way, so we can kind of get a little bit ahead of it. But yeah, I mean it's every state, every year there's some new issue that they're going to bring forward that we're going to have to fight. And the irony is exactly what you were just alluding to. And it's funny how many times I have to say this to people, even though it's so painfully obvious. Like, legalizing cannabis doesn't mean we're inventing cannabis. We're not bringing cannabis to your state. It exists today in an unregulated, untested, unsafe.
But Joe, here's my problem, right? I live in a prohibition state, but I walk in to the grocery store and past the liquor department, and there's pot leaves everywhere on these cans, and it's all THC, lacking beverages, all hemp, but it doesn't matter. They're all using the logos. They're all using this sort of, again, I'm not trying to step into the Farm Bill hemp THC discussion here, so take it easy with the nasty messages. I just want to move the discussion forward. I see both sides. I see why hemp is angry. I see why THC is angry. Here's my thing. I'm a consumer first. It's confusing, okay? Yeah. It's confusing to walk into a state. And the other day, my wife and I were at a mall, and there's a kiosk selling cannabis and mushrooms out of a kiosk in the middle of a mall in a prohibition state. Now, how is this possible? Finer print will tell you non-hallucinogenic mushrooms, cannabis is, lacking THC, whatever the case is. Why would we allow that discussion if we wouldn't allow the actual plant? And to your point, we as a state, I think it was $275 million of taxable income went over our borders in 2023 to other states. People are like, that's a gigantic number. Well, you know what number you don't include? All the businesses that could exist here, all the revenue that could be kept in your state, all the taxation that exists. Forget that, just business opportunity that exists. So, Joe, do you help fight? If you're fighting to keep it in a state, is part of any of the work that you guys do to get states on board? Does that factor into the game at all? Or is it all about kind of preserving the relationships that exist?
I mean, there are national organizations that we have been a part of that do that. MPP, NCIA, there's USCC, but for us, that is such an uphill battle to fight. Like, to support, let's say, a legalization effort in Wisconsin, extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And frankly, what's interesting now that we've gotten to a critical mass of legalized states, to your point about what money is going over the border, I'm kind of like, all right, so if I legalize in Wisconsin, I'll get some new Wisconsin consumers. But guess what? A lot of them are already going to, you
lose your Illinois foothold, you lose your Michigan foothold. It's just probably it's just Paul, essentially, right? It's not like you're going to create a bigger base to that extent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Joe, when you do your consumer piece, we'll wrap up part one with this. I know you guys do your research, you dig in. Right now, what's number one segment of age buyers of your product? I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah, for us, it's generally going to be sort of that 35 to 55 age range. So part of that is there's two reasons for that. One, our products are generally going to be priced a little bit higher than your lowest priced products in a dispensary. And so we know is that a lot of dispensaries consumers are going in, and this is something that I think we were going to talk about at some point, but the current environment is very price compressed, and a lot of that is driven by the dispensaries who are dropping those prices, and then of course coming to us as brands and saying, well, we need you to be at this price point because, and this is the part I don't get, they're like, we want all of our gummies to be at $15. Well, not all gummies are created equal. We put premium quality ingredients in there. We put 15 years of science and technology behind what we're doing. We're not the same price as this shitty gummy that someone just made for $1 at the kitchen down the street. They're not the same, right?
No, they're not the same. I mean, and neither is Miller Lite and Heineken. I find, you know what I mean? Like, I find this convenient narrative. If you walked into a liquor store and told a liquor store what the price their stuff at, you'd be out the other side of the door likely with no deal for your product.
And not only that, but it's also a signal for the consumer in the sense that, like, I like to use the jeans analogy. When I go to Nordstrom's and there's 27 different jeans, some of them are 200, some of them are 95. Like, that is helping me understand, like, okay, what is the value of this thing that I'm buying, and what are the materials they're using, and all of that figures into the consumer experience. So anyway, so point is that, trying in this price compressed market, we know that we're not going to appeal to maybe a 22-year-old who has $15 in their wallet and they want to buy the cheapest gummy to get high. That's not our consumer segment, and that's fine. And that's a huge segment, right? But that's not who we're approaching. But in addition to which, a lot of our products really focus on forward-thinking innovation. So a good example of this is our sleep products. We have two. Most companies have one, and sleep products do well everywhere because we know that's one of the number one reasons people are using cannabis right now. But we looked at it and we said, okay, there's really two issues going on with sleep. You either have trouble falling asleep or you have trouble staying asleep. So let's formulate products that attack those things differently. And so we have two sleep products. I believe we're the only company that does that. And so my point in saying all this is that not only do we have the premium pricing, but we also have products that are really targeted to use case specificity that tends to appeal to that slightly older demographic.
And that's because you're drilling down and you're digging in, and that's what I love about it. All right, we're going to wrap up the first half here. Joe, it seems like we might have gotten into the second half, but can you just kind of tease out what you want to talk about in the second half? Get folks excited here.
Well, I think for the second half, I'd love to talk about kind of where we're seeing the industry heading as a whole when it comes to where the opportunities are. And, of course, I'm coming at it from a very biased and specific perspective, which is that of Wana and edibles. But I think, we have so long have talked about the growing of the pie, looking at the market and saying, how are we gonna grow the pie overall? And we have yet to see that transpire. So some of it goes back to what I was just talking about in terms of who's coming to the dispensary, how the dispensaries are catering to a specific consumer that maybe is different than the one that we'd want to target with use case specific products and innovation and premium product placement. But I think that we're just about at the precipice where we can potentially explode that a little bit if we can get people on board with the idea that the dispensary as it stands today is only serving a very small sliver of the consumer segment. And granted, they're the ones who are buying the majority of the products, but there's so many consumers that we hear from that don't go into dispensaries because they don't like the dispensary environment. They don't feel like it's catered to them, but they want our products or they love our products, or so-and-so bought me, your sleep gummies and they made a huge difference in my life. Or, we have a couple of really exciting new products coming up. One is a pain formulation. That's something that, that takes a little bit of communication. There's complexity to it. We want the consumer to have all the information because we believe that cannabis can change people's lives, and we make products that are intended to do that. We have to figure out how to bridge the gap between the dispensary experience and the consumers who want the product, and that's where we can begin to grow the pie. And I'm tired of talking about it because it's been 10 years. We've been talking about, the soccer moms are gonna trade in their Chardonnay for gummies.
No,
they're not
they're doing that, but they're having their kids go buy it because they don't want to go. And that's the point to it. All right, everybody, look, you get excited about the second half. I'm going to be excited about it. Make sure you tune in to the second half. It'll be coming out a week after the first half. Don't forget today's show brought to you by King Solomon Nutritions, or Nutrients is what I got to get better at saying. Simplify your growing process. These guys have been doing it over 2 decades. Damian Solomon is an absolute rock star when it comes to growing anything, but especially this magical plant. From hydro to soil, expect uncompromised quality and optimized results. The best part about it, and I use it in my garden, it's low cost. It's only 2 steps, which I'm a simple dude. I appreciate that. So as always, I ask, are you down with the king? We will see you for the second half coming up soon.